Alrighty, welcome back to another episode of the I Can't Explain podcast. I'm your host, Goda T. And on today's episode, me and my guest, Ms. Hannah Maestro, will be discussing why we love horror movies, what makes them so good, and for some of you, why you just can't stand them. But without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Yeah, but so I always like to ask my guests, like I'll ask like my guests like how they're doing. It's just like kind of like a wellness check. So, how you doing today?
I am doing pretty well considering the circumstances. I am working on studying for my board exam. And I have 6 weeks to do that, so all of my time, well, most of it is spent just putting my nose in a book.
Got you. Yeah. So basically what you're saying is that if you pass, you could be shoving needles into my arm.
Yeah, with a license, right? I mean, I could do that at any time.
I mean,
I'm just doing it with a license.
Yeah,
That's
I mean, like
difference.
in reality, anybody can do that.
Yeah.
But you'll be licensed
Exactly.
to do that.
Yeah.
All right. But yeah, so today we're talking about horror movies and specifically why people like horror movies. So prior to recording this episode, we between the two of us, we kind of picked out some movies to watch just so that we have like some common like films that we can like discuss, like what we liked about it, what makes it a true horror movie, and just that kind of stuff. So the movies we chose were It Comes at Night, The Wailing, and Scream.
Also, Cabin in the Woods.
Also Cabin in the Woods. It was like kind of like interchangeable. But yeah, so those are the movies that we will like I guess be talking about together, and then we also have like other movies that we've seen in the past that we'll be kind of giving our comments and opinions on throughout the episode. So let's dive in.
Yes.
Yeah, so did you want to let's talk about It Comes at Night first. So just a background of the film, right? It's an A24 film, right? It's came out back in, was it 2017? I don't know. I did not do my research. Bad on me. But anyways, so yeah, so it's a A24 horror film, and then for people that might not be familiar with A24, it's I don't know how you explain it. It's like kind of like a smaller like studio like company.
Yeah.
And they usually fund like a lot more abstract and more, I guess, like kind of out there movie ideas.
I believe Ari Aster's work.
Yes, Ari Aster. So like The Witch, is Midsommar and Hereditary.
Hereditary,
Yeah, so also A24 films, but they also do like films other than horror movies. They did Uncut Gems with Adam Sandler.
Whoa.
Yeah, that was an A24 film, believe it or not. Yeah. But yeah, so anyways, rodeo. So
Premise, perhaps?
Huh?
Do you want to provide like a little premise of the...
Yeah, I guess I should have let off with this. So spoiler alert for those movies. Yeah, because we'll be kind of talking about the plot and the endings and just dissecting the movie. So yeah. Anyways, yeah, did you want to talk about the plot then? Alrighty, yeah. So I'll be talking about the plot of It Comes at Night. So basically, it's actually it's very timely. It's kind of about how the world has succumbed to this infection. So and it's interesting because the whole, I guess, the plot, or the thing about the infection in the movie is that you don't really see people like catching these infections. Like it's not like a typical like zombie movie where like, oh, like, you know, like, oh my god, like he's transforming into like this infectious person, like we need to, you know, like shoot him in the head and bury him in the woods or whatever. It's a very it's very subtle with I guess showing like what the infected person looks like. You know, at the very beginning of the movie, because you're following this family of three, or four actually, and so like the grandfather is sick with infection, but I guess like the big tall tale signs of whether or not you're infected, or you get like these warts all over your skin, and then you kind of like start to like bleed from pretty much every hole in your body. But according to like the father in the film, like, you know, like symptoms come up very suddenly, like, so incubation period is like really really quick. It's like within a day or within 1 to 3 days, you know you would know whether or not a person is infected.
Yeah.
But you get that very brief opening with like the grandfather, like he's like kind of like wheezing, he's having a hard time breathing, but it's very subtle about like, you know, what this infection is. So you're kind of left in the dark about that, which I thought was really interesting, you know, because like the typical horror film, you know, it's like you understand what I feel like you understand what exactly is the danger pretty, like, you know, from the jump.
Yeah.
But it's a little bit different in this film where you're kind of like not sure what this infection entails, but you know it's just like it, like if you have this infection you die.
Right.
Yeah, so it's very subtle in that, and I think like my take on the movie, I really liked how and we kind of talked about this earlier off air, but I think in this film specifically, the director, you know, purposely made these shots where it would kind of just like linger in the moment, that just like awkwardly like linger in the moment, where you're just like, it's like in that moment and you're just like, oh, like you're just expecting for something to happen, for something to just jump out, or for someone to get like, you know, like mangled by some kind of like infected animal, but nothing happens and it'll jump to the next scene. So it's very what is the word I'm looking for? Like it's very subtle, and it's like it's kind of scary in the sense where you don't know what to expect.
Exactly.
Like you're kind of like you're at the same pace as the characters in the story. You know, like you don't know exactly what's happening, and
that's what makes it terrifying.
Yeah, exactly. I think, I think, and I think more so than anything else with It Comes at Night, it was a psychological thriller. So, you know, it follows this family, and then I guess like the pivotal, you know, moment in the movie is this other dude breaks into the family's house, and whatchamacallit, he breaks into the house, and what's happening is like the dude is like the father of the house is very like distraught. He's like, oh, what the fuck, like who is this dude, you know, he's trying to like, you know, hurt my family. And then you come to find out that dude has his own family of so it's him, his wife, and their young son, and he's just like trying to find food, and he's just trying to like gather like, you know, supplies for them basically. So, you know, the two families come together and they live in the house together, and but the family who owns the house, the family that you're following from the very beginning, they have one son, and he's like, I think the character is like 17 years old. So Travis, that's the character's name. So Travis is 17 years old, and from what I understood from the film, like he was like really close to his grandfather. So when, you know, they ended up having to eventually kill, you know, shoot and kill his grandfather, and they buried him out in the woods, and they actually burned the body, like it messed with him like mentally, like psychologically, like it really affected him. So he's like throughout the movie, he's constantly having like these nightmares of like his like in the nightmare, like he'll be in his room and he sits up in the bed and he looks to his left and like his grandfather's sitting there, you know, like all like pale skin, bleeding from his eyeballs, and he's like freaking out, and I think it's like these. It's not necessarily a jump scare, but it's like these scares that kind of build up these characters and builds up the story, because eventually, because of what happens in these nightmares, like you kind of lose track of what is reality versus you know, what's just a nightmare, because at one point towards the very end of the film, Travis's dog, or well, their family dog like runs away, and the dog eventually comes back, and you know, like the dog is infected, obviously, like it's been like it's been attacked, it's been mauled by some kind of animal or person, you know, and he's all distraught because that's like one of his only things that he has left of his grandpa, right, as would anybody be distraught, and so like the next couple scenes following that, you know, like everybody's like all frantic because, you know, the door to the outside world was left open, so like everybody's worried whether or not someone in the household had opened the door, and if so, who opened the door. And the next couple nightmare sequences is of Travis like opening the door, going out and purposely looking for his dog, possibly, you know, risking everybody to be infected, versus like, you know, and then you start to question, like, is that a nightmare, or is that like him recalling what happened, because the whole thing was that that everybody was being was suspecting everybody else of opening the door.
Yeah.
And you know, and it so like everybody's like kind of like everybody, it kind of just turned into like a mad panic at the end, and like long story short, Travis's family kills the other family because the little boy ends up getting infected, and he's like coughing like crazy, and he's crying, and they find out that the little boy is infected. So rather than like, you know, the other family just like leaving, like they were trying to leave, but you know, with supplies, and then it just kind of goes all downhill and everything just unravels.
Yeah.
And the movie ends with Travis dying because he also, you know, came in contact with the little boy, so he dies, and it's just the father and the mother of Travis at a dinner table, and you're just like, whoa, like, you know, because you see how, you know, the father is trying to protect his family, but at the same time, you know, he turns into a monster himself, and it's like this it kind of like plays on your psyche, because you're like, you know, is this supposed to be an example of like what what happens when you're put into a situation where it's you versus, you know, someone else.
Yeah.
Like, you know, protecting your kin, your family, versus, you know, the lives of someone else. And it makes you question, you know, it's like one of those films where it's a horror film, you're scared, and like I remember watching the film, and I was rewatching the film last night, and it was like really late at night, and I vaguely remember the scenes that are coming up, but like I remember like my arms and my legs just getting like really tense, and I'm just like shaking. I'm like, oh god, like what's gonna happen?
Yeah, that feeling I remember getting specifically from Hereditary the first time I watched it. I think like Hereditary is very similar to It Comes at Night in that the scares are very subtle, and it's kind of like a slow burn, right? Where you don't really know what's coming. I'm also really interested in the fact that it had no humor in it whatsoever. I feel that many horror films, including The Wailing, use comedy as like a way to loosen
Right. Like
your
lessen
the
the tension.
yeah, and like push your guard down so that you don't think that a jump scare is coming for you, and then a jump scare does come. But in Hereditary, I remember it was just so tense throughout the entire film. And I specifically remember the first time I watched it, I had to walk out. I'd never walked out of a scary. No, it was that
so
scary.
So you were like at the theater, like with a friend or like a group, and you ended up walking out of the theater.
Yeah, it was just me. I just ended up walking out and taking a little break.
Wow.
Do you remember the scene where Charlie dies? Spoiler alert, guys. Sorry.
Yeah. So maybe like, would you mind giving like a? I know I really suck at giving a summarization, but like a really quick summarization of the movie Hereditary.
So Hereditary is about a family who kind of falls under the shadow of their grandmother, who passed early in the film, and this family, they're not very close. Like they're very what's the word for it? They're very distant with each other, and there are obviously very deep, I guess, emotional scars within the family, and there are many secrets within the family. And should I just spoil the end? Should I just get in there?
Yeah, feel free to do so. Yeah.
So it turns out that the grandmother is she practices Satanism, and she attempts to put a demon into her grandchildren's body.
Yeah. I think it was Charlie initially, right?
It was
the girl of the family.
Yeah, it was her initially. Well, technically it was her son who then killed himself, and then it became Charlie. But this specific demon, Paimon, doesn't like to be in women's bodies, so she had to transfer the demon into her other grandchild, who's Peter.
Yes.
And so she does that through her cult, who kind of manipulate certain situations to be able to ensure that happens. And in one scene, the cult places a dead body of a deer. And Peter's driving Charlie to the hospital because Charlie is allergic to peanuts, and she ends up getting a reaction, and he ends up swerving.
Well, yeah, she's like sticking her head out the window.
She's sticking her head out the window because she's trying to get air, and he swerves into a light pole, and her head comes off.
Yeah. No, and I think the really cool thing about Hereditary was it kind of like foreshadowed that, like towards like the mid. Well, I think it was like on the way to the party, right? Like it foreshadowed like the pole.
Yes. That's a whole other thing. Just how subtle the film is. You have to really pay attention to basically every single shot of the film. It's not imperative, but it definitely supplements how detailed Ari was in creating this film. For example, the way the film kind of symbolizes the demon entering the scene is through a light. And in one scene, Toni Collette's character, I don't remember what her name was. She was a mother.
Right.
She is painting on her own, and we see this like light flash, which symbolizes that the demon comes in, but it's very small. It's very subtle in the background, and all of a sudden we'll see like this a paint bottle tip over on its own, and it's very easy to miss. You'll think that she accidentally hit it with her hand, but it's actually just it happened on its own, and I had to watch it 2 or 3 times to see that happening. And it's these subtleties and it's this tension that you feel throughout the entire film. I think that's what got me, and that's why it's one of my favorite horror films, because you don't see, I guess you don't get the normal jump scare experience where you'll see like the tension building up and you'll see like pans and the shots like, right before, right?
And I think what it was too is that it was just like pretty much like I felt like almost every scene included in the film, like there was just like this tone and this feeling of just like being very like unsettling, you know. So like even as you're watching it, like you're kind of like you're squirming in your seat. You're like, oh, like this doesn't feel right. You know?
Exactly.
Like it's just like it's not necessarily like a jump scare, but there's just like this feeling that you're just like, oh, this is not right.
And it's not. It doesn't give you hints like as to like when a jump scare is coming like other films do. Like music especially is like I think a really big giveaway, and I think what Ari does in this film is he replaces like this scary music with silence, really, and that's really what makes it scary, is because you can see that Toni Collette is on the wall and she's kind of climbing on the roof and on the walls, and yet you don't hear anything, which is really distressing because you're not used to, I guess, silence. The silence.
Yeah, it's like being like in a vacuum almost. Like
exactly. Very similar with Midsommar. I believe you didn't watch this one.
I didn't get a chance to watch Midsommar yet.
It was also really interesting in that Ari didn't. I think. Have you seen the trailer for the film?
I have.
You have. It's literally filmed in broad daylight. Almost the entire film is in broad daylight, and that's so interesting because scary movies are, the darkness, and you're constantly trying to, I guess, look within the darkness because like most of it is, filmed in scary houses or in the woods or something. But this is, it takes place in the middle of summer.
Yeah,
so.
it juxtaposes like the traditional idea of what a horror film is expected to be.
Exactly, which I think is amazing. Ari's work, I think, is, in my opinion, one of the best in the horror genre. Moving on.
Yeah, moving on though. So the $1 million question is, I guess the topic is like why do people like enjoy horror movies? I did like a little bit of research because I know like this topic or this episode is gonna be teensy bit more like educational and scientific and to a degree, but it still be kind of like lighthearted. But yeah, let me hear your take though. Why do you think, like, why do people enjoy horror movies? Because I know obviously there are people that are just like, no, like I'm not gonna watch, like I'm not gonna watch Insidious with you. Like, no, that's not happening. Like, let's go watch a rom-com or something. Or let's go watch 21 Jump Street. like a comedy or something. But and then there are also people on the complete opposite spectrum, like oh, let's go watch like as soon as Halloween comes out, like let's go watch that, or like they're like horror fanatics, so so what do you think, what is your take on the reason why people enjoy horror movies?
Oh boy, I think that horror films or just thrillers or like in any genre that's that kind of takes away from the relaxation that is watching a movie. It's similar to riding a roller coaster, or you know what I mean, like kind of thrill seeking things to do, and it's such a strange I guess idea to want to relax and sit and spend your time watching a screen for 2 hours, and you do it just to be terrified. But yeah, I think it's a really good way for people to challenge themselves and to kind of explore the darker aspects of someone else's mind, right? Because horror movies are commentaries to our like directors or writers' minds. And
Right.
yeah, I think definitely personally, for thrill-seeking
Yeah, no,
purposes,
yeah.
I can't speak for everybody. Some people just have a need to watch scary films, but for me,
Yeah.
I do it so that I can, I guess, I think scary movies also challenge a lot of ideals, I guess. Like a lot of films are like very controversial. Like we see cannibalism in some films. We see things that aren't, I guess, seen in everyday life. Yeah, like they're not, you don't see them often, and it helps you kind of think, like it puts you in a what if kind of a atmosphere too. It's I think horror films are great to think about and analyze. What about you, T? What do you think? What
Damn,
draws
I think you
people?
took all the good reasonings. That was pretty much a lot of what you were saying was what I was gonna say. But I totally agree.
Yeah.
With your statement about like how people watch horror movies to like as a thrill. Like I actually, as I was doing my research, I came upon this one article from the Inland Norway University of Applied Sciences. And according to film scholar Soren Berkvant, he says in psychology we call this this activation of a feeling, it's called emotional regulation. But basically, like, it's just basically the idea of like when you ride a roller coaster or when you go to like a haunted house. It's being able to gauge like a person's limits or your own individual limits in a safe, well, quote unquote safe setting,
right?
In a controlled setting. But yeah, I think that's I think for a lot of people, I think that's what I think that's definitely like an appeal for horror movies or scary movies, is being able to like enjoy something that'll like scare you. Like it's something that usually might not happen in your daily life where you might be scared on a regular basis, but it's like this, like you get this adrenaline rush in it, and you're like, oh my god, like it makes you feel alive almost.
Yeah.
But also I think for all my big brain boys out there, I think there are a lot of horror movies out there or scary movies that, like you were saying, are able to be commentaries on like just everyday life. For example, the Night of the Living Dead, the original version. I don't know if people are aware of this, but so the original version, like the black and white version, was supposed to be a commentary on racism, actually.
Oh.
Because at the end, the last person standing is a black man, and so like they boarded up the house and they were able to make the night, and so like as the sun is coming up, he's like taking off the boards from the windows, and then he sees like a group of survivors like making their way towards the house. So instinctively, right, he goes out and he's like trying to catch their attention, and without even like questioning it, they just shoot and kill him. Like this mob of white males end up shooting and killing him, even though he wasn't a zombie, and they don't even question whether or not he was a zombie. They just, I think the quote was like, oh, like another one. It's not even like a question of whether or not like he was a survivor or a zombie or somewhere in between. So, and then I know the remake done by what is his name? I'm blanking out right now. Zack Snyder. Was it Zack Snyder? Well, it was like uh, not Night of the Living Dead, but it's like that zombie movie where they were in the mall. I don't know which. I feel like there are 5 billion zombie movies out there.
Yeah.
But there's like the one version where they're at the mall, and I know, like there are like subtle undertones of, like, this idea that like, of capitalism and like like this need for what you want. So they're put into this situation where they have everything they can dream of what they want at their fingertips, but obviously they're in a scenario where like it doesn't matter, like it's pointless.
Right.
But yes, I think it's kind of cool like that, where like horror movies can address those kind of situations, but also I think it's kind of cool where like directors and writers can take like these fears and these ideas that we're really comfortable with, or in situations where we feel safe. So for example, the film that uh, we kind of assigned ourselves to watch, The Wailing, right? And I didn't really catch this until like my second and third time viewing this film, but it was like kind of hostile towards like the family unit, because in the very beginning of the film, right, the film kind of opens up with the father, who's a police sergeant, and he's called up in the middle of the night because there's been a murder, and in their family unit, it's the husband who's the police sergeant, his wife, I think it's her mother, so the grandmother, and then their little daughter. So the grandmother insisted before he leaves for work, like, that he eats breakfast with them. So like the next shot, like they're all like, it's morning, they're all like eating breakfast together, and despite despite being called because there's been a murder, he takes the time to sit down with his family and to enjoy the moment, and then because of that he's late for work and he gets shit from his higher up.
Right.
But and as the movie progresses, though, the person who is directly affected because of all the happenings going on in the movie is the daughter. So it's this attack on the family unit, because in Asian culture, and I'm sure you're aware of this, but in Asian culture, right, the family unit is like kind of held above almost all other things.
Yeah.
Like the family unit is one. We move as a unit. We are a unit. And then you can see it in like Asian culture too, because like a lot of times like you'll have like multi-generational households. So yeah, it's like this attack on this safe idea where like if we stick as a unit, if we stay as a family, like we're safe. But it kind of like takes apart that idea.
Yeah.
Because the daughter is like basically like cursed, and then spoiler alert, but she ends up killing the mom and the grandma and the father eventually at the very end of the film.
Yeah.
So yeah, like so the director and the writer were able to like take this safe idea, like this idea where you think, oh, like nothing ever happens to the family, like if they stick together. But yeah, that's exactly what they did. Like they took it apart, and so yeah.
I think, sorry, adding to that, the dad finding out that it was his fault.
Yeah.
That was a whole other thing, because he took the blame. That also further tore up the whole family idea. But this is reminding me of Parasite. We're talking about commentaries.
Because although Parasite isn't like a horror movie, like
yeah, it's I think that it was a really interesting take. Like it didn't necessarily tear apart the family. If anything, it kind of focused on the bond that the family had.
Well, and it depends which family you're talking about. If you're talking about the Park family,
that's right.
or the Kims.
We're talking about the Kims. The Kims are the ones who.
Or I think the Park family is the rich family.
Yeah, we're talking about the other guys. The
other guys. Yeah.
Um, yeah, it definitely focused more so on their bond, and instead of like tearing it apart, they kind of, um, I guess, were united towards the end. Um, yeah, definitely. I mean, considering the fact that at the end the son was still looking for his dad and finding a way to get him back. Yeah.
Dying.
Um,
Yeah.
I think another really interesting topic that I've been thinking about in terms of horror movies is the whole nature versus nurture aspect of fear itself. Because if you think about it, how do we know what we're I mean, this is kind of weird to explain. Do you think that our fears are learned, or do you think that there's some sort of I guess primal kind of thing in our head that we've learned through generations of like fear? Do you know what I mean? Like let's say vampires, right? We are like just monsters with fangs. How do we know to be afraid of that? You know what I mean, right?
Great question.
How do we know that we should be putting these in horror movies or darkness?
Right.
You know, like just that general theme. It's such an interesting thing to think about. Just the birth of like these, I guess, these horror themes or horror topics.
Oh, that is true. I mean, like we need to address your question. I think it could possibly be stemming from like cultural like mythology and stuff like that, because you kind of see that in certain films where like like the Babadook, where like basically the evil in the film is like this boogeyman kind of character, but the idea of a boogeyman kind of is a multilingual, multicultural idea. Because in every culture there's some shape or form or idea of a boogeyman.
Yeah. I could see
or
that.
even like so like in culture or even like in history.
Yeah.
Where when sailors would go out onto the high seas and they wouldn't return, and stories would be made up like, oh, the Kraken got them. The Kraken is this giant squid and it'll take you down if you're not safe, right? Or whatever.
Such an interesting thing.
But I don't know. That is a good question to kind of ponder upon, though, whether or not, like nature versus nurture. Why we're scared of certain things.
I feel like it could be a combination of both easily.
I easily think it definitely could be a combination of both. And I think it comes down to like the unknown as well. Like if you're uncertain about something, like even like in normal daily life, like if you don't know like how you did on that test, like you're uneasy, you're anxious, and then, or as a little kid, or even some adults out there, guilty. But like you're going into like you have to cross a hallway that's like pitch black, and you're just like, oh.
Ooh, I've done that in a very empty hospital hall once. 0 out of 10. Yeah, it's so interesting because you don't know where it's I mean, I guess you've seen it in horror films. I wonder what like if someone never saw a horror film their entire life, do you think that they'd be scared of anything? Theoretically?
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, like they were kept in a cave.
Yeah.
They never learned.
Maybe not a cave.
Yeah.
Cave isn't necessary. They just never have seen any horror film. They've never been exposed to the horror genre at all. Like, do you think that they'd? I don't know. It's something to think about.
What? Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of cool. That is an interesting question. That is something we will definitely have to do another episode about. Yeah, that's something I can't explain.
do more research.
Yeah. Kind of going back to like how horror movies are able to like take apart things that make us comfortable. I know there's this one film on Netflix that I saw. I think it's called The Void. I believe. I think that's what it was called. But the majority of the film takes place in like this like the sheriff department's building, right? And you would think, common sense, like you would think like that would be like probably your safest bet as far as like where you would be safe. But they totally just like rip that apart and they're like, nope, like, it's not safe. This is and then yeah, like regardless whether or not it was like a sheriff's building or like someone's house, or like house invasion movie, like horror films, like I'm trying to think of a good one.
I mean, going back to Midsommar, you'd think that daytime is
exactly
completely safe and
right.
Nothing scary could happen, but the complete opposite happens.
Exactly. It's pretty wild because like we kind of talked about like how horror films are, I think, distinctly connected to darkness or the unknown, or like nighttime. But then like Midsommar just like totally scraps that. Like, nope, we're gonna do this in broad daylight because we're cool like that, and we're because we don't rely on jump scares.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or even like I remember watching Insidious the first time, and that one scene where the mom and dad are in the kitchen, they're having a conversation, and it just seems like a very like regular conversation, and all of a sudden like the Darth Maul looking demon comes is behind the dad. And he's like, oh shit, and it's like broad daylight, and they're in the kitchen, and you're just like you're not expecting that. You're like, oh,
exactly.
Oh my god.
And that other scene where the woman is, or the wife is, she's taking out the trash, right? And
yes,
you don't catch it at first, but there's a little boy within one of the shots, and it's so subtle because you don't there are no like scares or sounds that kind of hint.
Cue it, yeah.
And it's in broad daylight, so it's amazing when I guess writers and directors can kind of create fear out of something that isn't fearful. Clowns. There's that whole clown thing.
Holy moly, yeah.
Back in what, 2016? There was that whole clown craze.
And it kind of coincided with the release of It, right?
Yeah, It.
Yeah, but to think, I guess like before that, before like the idea of like killer clowns in horror movies and stuff like that, like parents thought it was a good idea to invite a clown to a kid's birthday party.
Hey.
Oh my god,
I had a clown at my birthday party at some point in my life. I have pictures of it. It was fantastic. This just comes to show, though, like just the development of these ideas that people can have just to make everyday things is something as innocent and as funny and supposedly silly as clowns into something terrifying.
But on that note, though, it's kind of crazy because like, does art mimic life or life mimic art? Because like, there's the whole like John Wayne Gacy thing where he would dress up as a clown and he would like murder these kids.
Yes.
You know? So like what came first, the clown horror genre or the clown killing kids?
That's another thing
right?
to think about.
Like it's a scary concept.
Yeah.
Because where does the boundary between fiction and reality, blur? Mm-hmm. Right? Because like there are even films historical fictional films where they'll take like the basis of an event that happened in history. So let's say like World War II or something, and all these all these terrible experiments that the Nazis did, and then you you get a film like what is it called? I think it Overload. Where it's basically like I think it's like the plot of the movie is that it's like the ending or near the ending of World War II, but they're like experimenting, or like the Nazi regime is like experimenting and they're creating like zombies and like mutant humans and stuff like that. You know, so like yeah, so there are horror movies like that where it's like historical nonfiction. So they take like this historical piece in history and like they spin it in a certain way.
Right.
Yeah.
Not to get too off topic.
Yeah, not to get too off topic.
But hopping into American Horror Story, they play so much with history. Roanoke.
Yes.
I mean, even the Nazi experiments. Season 2.
Was that Asylum?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was Asylum. They take a dip into the future with Apocalypse and Salem, the witch trials in season 3. It's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought. Like the whole, what came first?
Yeah. Right.
The
so
art
like it just creates this whole nother dimension of horror movies.
Yeah.
Like so like you're hanging out with like, your friends. Instead of watching a horror movie, let's watch this documentary of horrible things that have happened in history, and it's almost like a non-fiction horror movie if you think about it.
Yeah, definitely. It makes you think, what could I do with, let's say, teddy bears? I mean, that's definitely a horror thing, right?
Yeah.
Like
I mean, like Chucky.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like you take like this
like a doll,
and then you turn it into a psycho killer.
Yeah. God, is there something that hasn't been made into a horror film?
Yeah, I mean Jaws created like this phobia of people like being eaten by sharks and like, not wanting to go to the beach. What else?
Eggs.
Eggs.
No, sorry, this is so strange, but there was a film that I watched about a clown, and what he does is he puts, I believe, the souls of clowns into eggs, and there are different clowns. There are different killer clowns.
What?
And if you smash an egg, then you kill this clown.
Whoa.
So I'm so sorry. Like, this is just so strange and
random,
off topic, but eggs are also definitely part of Alien. Alien wasn't right. Like,
and then
anything really. Disease.
Or how Michael Myers turned. What is that dude's name?
Yeah.
The dude from Star Trek. But basically, like, because the Michael Myers mask is like the mold of that guy's face.
Mm-hmm.
I'm blanking on his name.
Sorry.
Or how Jason Voorhees turned hockey mask into like this horror iconic horror item.
Exactly. Interesting. Yeah, lots of I never really thought about
how horror movies have kind of influenced society and pop culture.
Exactly.
Right? And it's pretty crazy, and like, so when people are like, I don't like horror movies, like, yeah, so you're saying that you don't like, like there are a bunch of stuff that I think stem from horror movies, or like, like horror movie concepts.
Yeah.
Or it's just like, you don't like horror movies, like you don't enjoy the idea of, like having like, like adrenaline rushing and stuff like that. Like you don't like going on roller coasters, or you don't like,
I think the main thing that I guess, or the main thing that makes people not want to watch horror films is the after. So the thrill is, I imagine, it's one thing, but the maintenance, or like the just having that image of like a terrifying old woman standing in the window, you know, like it just in your head while you're trying to sleep. Like that's a whole other thing. Like I think people don't like watching scary movies because of the vulnerability that they feel late at night when they're alone in their bed and they don't, you know, they have that image.
Like as you're lying in bed and you see like
that weird shadow.
And you're like, oh, it's not real. It's not real.
So I definitely understand why people wouldn't want to watch scary movies for that reason.
And it's funny because that reminds me of like that one Key and Peele skit where like like they're walking from the theater. I guess like they park so they park really far from the theater and then like they're walking back. They're like, yeah, I'm not scared. Like that, like oh, it's all fake. And then like the cat runs by. They're like,
They're just paranoid.
Yeah, and then
love that one. That's a really good skit.
I think you make a valid point when you say that though, because I definitely get that way. Even if it's like for a little bit though, like as soon as you finish watching a movie, like you're walking down the hallway and it's like pitch black and you're like, is there something in front, like standing in front of me? Or like you'll be like passing by a window and like I think I just saw someone on the street staring into our house, and you just like freak yourself out.
Yeah, exactly. This actually reminds me when you said like the whole window thing, and I also brought up the old scary woman in the window. I literally during the Wailing there was that naked lady at the window, right? And it made me think. I was watching last night, and it's kind of the reason why I couldn't really sleep last night. I realized that there are certain themes that people are scared of, right? Like for me, it's like creepy postures, like people with unnatural or like strange, very wonky postures that you don't see every day. That's what gets me. Putting that in a window terrifies me even more. And it's like it makes you think of what gets to people. Right. I think that's another really interesting thing. Like for you, what do you know?
Oh man,
of, like,
I think like for me, I think it's more of like the unease or like the unknown, like not knowing what's coming. So I think a lot of times, like for me, I think the most effective and scariest horror movies are the ones with like that have like really good sound designs and like make good use of like their music or lack of music in some situations, because like the music will build the tension and like maybe like the camera's like panning across like a hallway or panning across a room and you're just like, oh god. That's what gets me is like the anxiety of it, like the build up, and you're just like, oh crap, like what's, oh my god, like, I know there's something there, like oh no, or like you're watching and you're like, oh shit, like she's on the ceiling, like what the, oh no. no. Yeah, that, I mean, for me though, that's what gets me in horror movies. It's like that build up, that tension,
anxiety. Yeah.
Like for me, it's not necessarily the jump scare, but it's like the build up to the jump scare.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I imagine that's what a lot of people are afraid of with scary movies. A scary movie is like knowingly walking into a home knowing just rephrase this whole thing, walking into a home knowing that there is something in the house waiting to come and jump in front of you and scare the living
or even like Sinister. Have you seen that film?
Yes.
Oh my god, that was a really good film, because I think because that one was like, it was like the sound design, it was the story, where it's like these people are like filming like murdering their families and stuff like that, and like this is it Ethan Hawke? I think it's Ethan Hawke, but Ethan Hawke's character is like watching these films. he's like what's happening, like, you know, like he doesn't know what to make of it. You know, and it's, yeah, I think for me, I think specifically like in horror movies, I think the horror movies that get me are supernatural horror movies, because like, you know, if it's like a creature or a person, there's like this rationalization that I can hurt it or I can kill it, you know, but you can't kill, or like, I guess in the traditional sense, in the common traditional sense, like you can't kill a spirit or you can't kill a demon, like,
right.
You know, you have like, there's like like you have to get an exorcism or you know, all those like different things, you know.
I'm actually quite the opposite.
Really?
I am most scared of like home invasion films, or films with like human beings killing other human beings, because it's so much closer to our reality. And that's what really gets to me, because it's like, man, this could happen to me at any day, you know. It's just, it builds like that fear that's so realistic, and it's so it can happen anytime, and that's really what gets to me. And you're like vulnerable sitting there knowing that, hey, there could be a scary serial killer.
See, and then that brings me to the topic of kind of just like wrapping this episode up, but how horror movies in recent memory, like within the last 30 years, have become very meta, with like movies like Scream and Cabin in the Woods, like, what's your favorite scary movie? You know, and like, you're just like, what? Like, what? Like, you know, like you're asking what your favorite scary movie is in a scary movie.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very meta. And like, even like, as like the movie is like progressing, like, you know, like the characters are like, rule number 1 of scary movies, like, you know, don't say I'll be right back or whatever, or like, you know, like, don't have sex in the movie, you know, don't have sex, and what else are they saying?
Don't split up.
Don't split up and stuff like that, you know. And like, it's like very meta, because it's just like, that's exactly what people do in horror movies.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, you make sure like your shoes are tied on correctly, because like you're gonna like, don't trip or whatever, you know.
Cabin in the Woods does that really, really well.
Yeah, and I think yeah, like, cause Scream was like in the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's the same writer as Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, interesting.
I believe so. Wes Craven.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, but even like for A Nightmare on Elm Street though, the director Wes Craven got the idea because like there's like these string of cases where people just, well, you know the plot of Nightmare on Elm Street, right?
Yeah.
So like these strings of cases where people would just like die in their sleep, like they're healthy, you know, normal people. A lot of times, I think they were like teenagers or like young adults, right. And they'd be found in their apartments or whatever, dead. Yeah. You know, but yeah, Wes Craven with Scream and how like it became very meta. A Cabin in the Woods.
Fantastic film. I watched that one recently. Should have watched it earlier, but I really liked their play on the whole horror movie. I just I don't know, I feel like there's always been that curiosity for me to want to see different horror creatures not really interact really, and there have been several films that have done that, like Sadako versus
yeah, it's like really like gimmicky.
Yeah, and what was her name? Kayako?
Huh?
Kayako, is that her name? The woman from The Grudge? I believe that was her name.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, Jason and Freddy, yeah. Very interesting films, and Cabin in the Woods just shoved all of the...
I think what I liked about it personally is like they addressed, like they really leaned into like being meta, where like they had like the archetypes for horror movies, like the stoner, the jock, the hot girl, the virgin, the nerdy guy.
And
know?
what they do, what they choose to do, and they place
and then
bets.
How, like, there's like that one scene in the film where Chris Evans' character, not Chris Evans,
Hemsworth.
Chris Hemsworth's character is like, oh, you know, like, let's search the house, like, let's stay together, and then like they like turn up, like they pump in like pheromones or something into the air, like all of a sudden, like, in split second, he's like, oh, never mind, let's split up, you know, and then like, cause like in horror movies, you're like, why would anybody like in their right mind split up? Like,
right.
It just doesn't make any sense. But then like they start turning on like these pheromones, like, cause like it's Chris Hemsworth and the girl, and they're in the forest, and all of a sudden like they just want to like go at it.
Yeah.
You know, and like any logical person would be like, this is not the right time.
And even they thought that at first, right?
And
until
then like
they
all of a sudden like they start pumping like the
in.
hormone, like the hormones
Exactly.
into the air, and then they're just like having at it.
Yeah. Sorry, well, I heard some spooky sounds. I don't know.
Oh, that was me tapping shit.
No, it was a ghost. No. Yeah, very, very interesting topic. Thank you for having me over.
Of course. But yeah, before we kind of wrap it up, though, I always like to hand it off to my guests. If you feel like we missed anything you want to add on to the topic.
If anything, I am walking out of this with more questions and more determination to watch more spooky films. I think definitely the nature versus nurture, and then the art before life versus life before art. Definitely really interesting topics that I'd like to explore and think about.
Yeah, it's like it seems like a waste of brain power, but it is one of those like things that you just want to like. I'm definitely gonna ponder now.
Yeah. I don't think it's a waste. I mean, being someone who's really, really interested in horror films, it's a hobby, you know. It's I think it's worth my time.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, you know what though? Because of just like the nature of this episode, let's end on like a rec. So maybe we'll do 2 from you, 2 from me, maybe like a rec for some really good horror movies.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't familiar with that term. A recommendation.
Oh yeah, like a recommendation.
Hereditary.
Hereditary.
I'm so sorry for spoiling it for you guys. Just pretend it didn't happen, but it's one of my favorite films. So definitely check that one out. And I think a really good classic that I grew up on is the 1981 version of The Evil Dead.
Ooh,
super fun stuff.
Yes.
It's like it's a cult classic. You just gotta watch it, I think.
Yes.
There's also a remake. That one was pretty good too, surprisingly.
Oh, the most the
2013 version. That one was pretty good. Yeah, those are 2 recs from the T.
Very good recs. Very good recs.
Thank you.
Well, although we kind of semi-spoiled it, I think I definitely would recommend The Wailing. It's although it's a foreign film. It's a Korean horror film. It's called The Wailing. It's definitely a must-see though for anybody that is interested in horror. It's a really good film. Just sit through it and just read the damn subtitles. 'Cause it's worth it. It's really good.
And the visuals are stunning as well.
Yeah, I think it's just such a good film. Yeah, so definitely The Wailing, and see, this is so hard. I was the one that like brought this up. But it's so hard to just choose 2.
Yeah, no.
There's so many good films out there. Yeah, so definitely The Wailing, available on Amazon Prime.
Is there a film that you watched in your childhood that got to you?
Oh man, actually, I think a film that really stuck with me was, and it's not necessarily a film. It was like a TV adaptation or like a series, but a classic It series.
there was a series?
It was like a made-for-TV like series. So it was like, so everybody thinks like the original It was a film, but it was actually like a made-for-TV. Like it was broken up into like 5 parts. Or
Right,
whatever.
right. I know what you're talking about.
That messed me up as a kid.
I'll definitely take a look at that. I've heard.
Oh, actually, you know what? Talking about killer clowns. So first rec, The Wailing. Second rec, Terrifier. It's on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
It's like very random. It's like almost borderline goofy.
Yeah.
But it's like kind of like disturbing. Kind of messes with your brain.
Love that.
Actually, I redact that statement. Sorry.
You're good.
The Wailing and The Autopsy of Jane Doe. Have you seen that film?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that one's a good one.
Really good.
That one will mess you up for a hot minute.
The
Because
way
it certainly
it
did for me.
unfolds. Yeah.
It was really good.
Mm-hmm.
That one I think I watched on Netflix.
Yeah, it should be up there.
But that one was really good.
I think the way that it like kind of unravels, like the mystery unravels itself, it's so disturbing.
Oh,
Ugh. Getting chills from that, yeah.
Yeah. But definitely I would say top 4 recommendations from me, between me and Hannah. But definitely check out the films that we mentioned in the podcast. We mentioned Midsommar, a little here and there, Jaws,
Yeah.
A Nightmare on Elm Street, Scream, A Cabin in the Woods.
It Comes at Night.
It Comes at Night. Hereditary.
So many.
But yeah, definitely feel free to check those films out because definitely worth a watch. But on that note, I will hand it over to Hannah though. So if you want to plug anything, this is your moment. Anything coming up or anybody you want to plug or...
The only thing I could think about is a good friend of mine, Seiji. He will be releasing an EP very soon.
Ooh.
So that's definitely something to look forward to. If you want to follow him, you can find him at seiji.music. That's SEIICHI.music on Instagram. Yeah, definitely check his tunes out. It's really good. I really enjoy it. That's basically all that I've got.
Alrighty. Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you, Hannah, for being on the podcast. Truly appreciate it.
This was so fun. Thank you so much for this experience.
Of course. But yeah, thank you again, folks, for listening. This has been another episode of the I Can't Explain podcast. I'm your host, Goda T, signing off.